Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this short panel discussion, debate, hopefully. Hopefully we'll have time for some questions from the audience as well. That would be great. This is the energy transition debate, and we're really focusing on the importance of understanding different approaches to the energy transition, and especially with the relationship to investment decisions. So we know that the need is vital to transition to low carbon energy, but it is a challenge for governments and for investors. We even hear at the moment in the European elections that there is a perceived cost to the transition, the energy transition, and it's a political issue across Europe. It's also clear that there's a level of disinformation from both sides of the argument, protecting vested interests, and there are also many hidden costs and benefits of the energy transition, which are very hard to unpick. And David, your transparent is sort of trying to unpick some of those questions. I'm aware of your software package. So it's very clear that there's no single or easy answer to the challenges facing the transition. My personal view is that we need a basket of solutions to solve it that can be delivered rapidly and at scale. And I'm sure we all have our own views on where the emphasis on that transition should be made. So hopefully this debate will highlight the different approaches to investment decisions and the approaches to the transition. So my name's Stephen Crocher. I'm the CEO of a company called Reenergize. We're a long duration energy storage solution. We're a couple of years from market. Is our solution, and then I'd like to introduce the remainder of the panel. So we have Val Grevenko, I hope I pronounced that right. So previously, or currently executive chairman, an investor and co-founder at Angara, based in the UK and the Netherlands, technology company that helps industrial plants to reduce their CO2 emissions. Val was a venture builder behind a number of deep tech companies, which I'm sure he'll explain a little bit more when I give him the introduction stage. I'm not going to go too long through this bio. Val, please extend it in a minute, sure. Should you wish to do so. Nigel Robertson spent most of his career in corporate and investment banking in the energy, utilities and infrastructure sectors, advising on large and mid-scale transaction and capital raisings across the globe. Citi and Investec Bank, again, please sort of expand on your CV. And then David, an innovator and entrepreneur with a focus on new technologies to support net zero. In 2003, David co-founded and was CEO for 7 years, Utilita, who is now a leading challenger in the retail energy sector. Senior positions previously at National Power, AES and Shell International. Again, you can talk about transparent. So as you introduce yourselves, I'm hoping to also ask you some specific questions as part of your opening statements, just to sort of start to structure the debate. So starting with Val, if that's okay. So hopefully this will just be a 3 minutes each or something like that. I'm hoping Val is going to talk to us about decarbonisation of industries, including the oil and gas, and addressing why they've been stuck in the past. So a couple of questions for your introduction. So how does Angara's global technology contribute to the immediate reduction of CO2 emissions? And what are the potential long-term benefits for investors? And what are the main challenges you face in implementing AI-powered decarbonisation technologies at scale?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Stephen. So I was initially an investor in Angara and then turned into co-founder in a nutshell. And we started to work with the oil and gas industry, actually helping to abate their emissions quite a few years ago. That's why we have hands-on experience on that. So at scale, what we do for clients in oil and gas and now also in petrochemical segment, we help them to abate emissions by keeping their equipment clean most of the time, like heat exchangers. And we're talking about a potential of saving about $70 billion for this otherwise $3 trillion industry per year, and 400 million tons of CO2 emissions can be abated. So it's a big impact thing. And the challenges we have been facing in this industry is that most of them are related to organizational challenges, organizational behavior, people complacency, inertia, mental inertia, and risk aversion. So they're not really technologically related. We have very proven technological solution, and nevertheless, the challenge is how to embed that solution in the organizational processes of clients in a user-friendly way. So that was the biggest challenge, I guess, so far. And another thing, what we learned, hard way, I would say, was that we have to distinguish between corporate PR and the real motivation behind purchasing and other decisions. In other words, the companies are really focused, most of the companies are really focused on bottom line rather than sustainability and decarbonization, unfortunately. But on the other hand, it's understandable, they're businesses and they're about generating profits and shareholder value. So decarbonization things and all those sustainability things are more like regulators' realm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Val. And turning to David, so I'm hoping you're going to discuss an analogy between oil and water and highlighting the need to take people along with on the journey, but also some specific questions. What are the key factors that make an energy transition investment viable and attractive in the current market? And from your work at Transparent Energy, what data and analysis should investors focus on when considering investments in the energy sector?
Thanks, Stephen. So I'll answer the first question for investors simply. The way to get investment into the energy industry is the way it's always happened, through subsidies. Government-backed contracts, long-term, very reliable, and you can invest in stuff, and that's the way it'll happen, because it can't happen probably any other way. But that's, maybe we can debate that and see whether that's set the room on fire or not. The purpose of Transparent Energy, my new startup, currently got a very small SEIS investment round, if anyone wants to join in, is that there needs to be a coming together of, there's been a kind of overreaction to the challenge of net zero, I think. So where does the energy transition sit in the humans' challenges on planet Earth at the moment? Well, I always refer to the Millennium Goals. It's maybe a little bit old now, but clean energy was only on the second row of 3 rows of Millennium Goals. Yeah, we have an awful lot of human problems to solve, as well as a transition to clean energy. I think that, having framed it in that way, what I see and what the purpose of Transparent is to be non-opinionated. So Transparent doesn't have a view about what is the right pathway to net zero. I think if it had a view, it would just say it's extremely uncertain and you need to take quite wide views on the likely possible outturn for different technologies. I just heard on Dr. Andrea talking about data farms and stuff like that, and the energy guys all putting linear growths on that. I mean, that's not the way that things happen in the energy system. There are learning curves. Investor group like this are fully aware of what learning curves are and how they work. So I think when we're talking about the future of the energy transition, it's uncertain, and what we need is more societal actors involved in the discussion. And what we've got is gurus sitting behind big walls, sending out models that tell you that the answer is hydrogen, or the answer is coal, or the answer is air source heat pumps, or whatever it is. And our opinion at Transparent is that's not the answer. The answer is going to be far more nuanced than that. Humankind has a magical ability of doing things in an unexpected way, and I expect they'll do it in an unexpected way. I think need to, I have a TED talk that I think my mum has seen 4 times, but the TED talk was basically initiated because I put on the form that clean tech does not exist. So I think we're kind of getting through the clean tech thing. There was a whole load of conferences years ago called clean tech conferences. And the reason my TED talk for clean tech was of interest is because I wasn't saying that clean tech didn't exist. I was saying we didn't need the clean bit. Actually, all technology since the dawn of time has been cleaner than the technology that went before it. So actually I challenge people to say to me, okay, no, David, that's rubbish because I've got a technology for you that's really dirty. Well, go on then, because nobody's been able to win that conversation yet. TV remote was offered once, but that's cheating because it's a digital TV that's better than the old one that you had before. So I think clean tech doesn't exist. I think we need to invest in technology. And when we invest in technology, I was talking to an AI company that makes something more efficient that I don't understand, but I'm sure they do. That'll be cleaner than the technology that went before it, and it will save energy. I'm not worried about the growth in data centers if you're out there worrying about, because I think what people don't understand about data centers is from an energy perspective, it's substitution. You know, we used to have, what did we have? Cameras, filofaxes. Oh God, there's a long list of stuff we used to have before digital came along, and it made that far more efficient. Yes, you have a consumption of the digital world, but it's less than the old world, so I'm not worried about that. You asked me the oil and water question. Yeah. So if you've got 5 minutes, I'll go over my time on the oil and water, and then I'll shut up. So I think what we've got is two industries. And you can, in the energy industry, we've got two industries, and you can describe them or have a metaphor, if you like, which is one is the oil industry, or the fossil fuel industry, and the other one is the water industry, or if you like, the renewable industry. And what we do is we put them in a glass, and if you leave that glass on the side of your kitchen, you'll discover, as you know, that the oil layer separates out and the water layer separates out. You know, the oil goes on top of the water for those for deep technical persuasion. And basically, what we have with the oil and the fossil fuel industry that I started my career in, is you have low fuel costs, low capital costs and high operating costs. If you're in the fossil fuel game, your fuels are quite expensive to the end consumer. Gas is quite expensive, oil is quite expensive. If you're in the water industry, and if you literally are in the water industry, you're a water company, then you have high capital costs and low operating costs because it rains. You put the rain in a high capital cost reservoir and you take it out where it's there. So they are very different and they're regulated in a different way. And what we have at the moment is a renewable industry that looks like water, and we have a fossil fuel industry that looks like oil. And what regulators are trying to do is take a massive blender and shove it in that mug and blend it up so it looks like some kind of emulsion that they can then say, well, we can have a CFD for wind because wind is, you know, prices its power in the market that I blended to make it look like it's economic. Whereas the water industry say, well, I don't want anything to do with my pence per litre of water. I want an availability contract. So we should change the model of regulation for renewables. Renewable companies, wind, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar companies, whatever they are, should be rewarded with availability contracts. You simply provide at least capital cost, the most number of kilowatt hours of power you can from the resource that you get from Mother Nature for free. Yeah? And the oil industry can carry on doing what it's always done, which is fine. And we should not regulate them the same. And by trying to regulate them the same, as soon as you leave that mug of water, of emulsion on the side, it separates out into the two things it is. So I would say as regulators, they need to have, they're always a bit late with innovation. We need a massive innovation to release the massive amounts of investment that we need, and we need to regulate the two industries completely differently.
Thanks, David. That's a big debate that I'm sure people will pick up with David afterwards. And Nigel, so obviously introduce yourself, but also can you elaborate on the role of green hydrogen in the energy transition and its potential for scalability and investment? And how does your experience in clean energy financing influence your perspective on the best avenues for investment in the energy transition?
Okay, so I'm actually going to start with something else, and then I'll come back to those questions. So I thought it'd be quite useful just to look at the energy transition cycle and what actually happens during that cycle. Since Industrial Revolution, we've probably had 4 or 5 energy transitions from coal through oil and gas, electricity, and now moving into renewable energy. These are on average 40 to 50 years in duration. And during that period of time, there are 2 very, very distinct phases. There's the innovation stage, which is sort of half of that period, and then there's the deployment stage. And energy, by its very nature, is very capital intensive, infrastructure heavy, and is prone to being dominated by national utilities, national oil companies, who exhibit extremely defensive behaviors to new entrants during that cycle. In the innovation period, what we have is a lot of entrepreneurs, SMEs, clean tech, clean energy technologies looking to become the dominant technology in their niche against a changing landscape now of decarbonization and climate change. We have a lot of innovation happening. This period is known as the eruption, not eruption as a volcano, but eruption. So this is when clean tech and clean entrepreneurs start coming through with their very specific technologies, which will fit into this next phase of the transition. At this point, finance and financial capital is completely, shall we say, disinterested, or finding it at least very, very difficult to engage and understand not just the position of the technology, but the future of the technology and how it scales up and how it becomes dominant in its niche. At some point, we cross over and financial capital gets all excited. The guys get it, the VCs get it, the PEs get it, the capital markets get it. And they start driving productive capital through this implementation to deployment phase. And at this point, we start to get a frenzy. And these frenzies ultimately are driven by rates of return, they're driven by leverage, they're driven by yield, they're driven by Excel spreadsheets and investor and shareholder expectations. They're not driven by the ability of that technology to play a key role, a value-added role in the energy transition. Ultimately, this leads to a bubble, it leads to financial collapse, and it leads to a recession. And I think we've already seen that in some of the technologies that have been SPAC'd in NASDAQ, EV buses, EV trucks, companies that have actually never even been in the automotive sector, but are suddenly worth X billion, but nothing behind, and guess what? They fail. So at this point, financial capital is left holding a lot of losses, creditors, as well as equity. What happens is we have a pulling back, a re-establishment, some sort of, you could say, little recession in investment. But then financial guys and production guys get together. They get into this synergistic phase. And this is what we've seen in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, around onshore wind, offshore wind, solar PV. These technologies have become accepted. They have become commoditized. And this is the synergistic phase between financial and productive capital. It's the golden age. What follows the golden age is a period of maturity and a period of leveling off of growth and new technologies starting to play into that space. And this is what Schumpeter describes as destructive capitalism. And I think where we are today in our clean energy transition against that wider landscape is very, very early stage, still maybe just 10, 15 years into that 40, 50-year cycle. So a long way to go and a lot of issues to face along that journey.
Thank you very much. That was really insightful. So moving on to some sort of questions to debate. So the first one is I've got titled as decarbonisation versus renewables. So hopefully we can have a little bit of tension here. So decarbonisation and renewables are often seen as competing approaches. But should we, or how can we, view these strategies as complementary rather than oppositional? And are there any benefits of the integration of the two? Anyone want to?
I can argue on that. Not argue, but basically I'm focusing on decarbonizing existing industries. And here I'm maybe a little bit biased and guilty as charged. But I believe that we don't have a choice as humanity, but to both decarbonize the existing energy ecosystem, but also build the new one as fast as possible. And if we look in the past, well, the primary source of energy was wood, then it was overtaken by coal, and oil and gas as a primary source of energy, or the biggest source of energy, started to be in the 60s of the last century. And if from these 60 years later now, we still consume more coal than we consumed it back in the 60s, while consuming enormous amounts of oil and gas, and now renewables are growing quickly. So we have to decarbonize, and oil and gas is projected to grow for at least another 10 years. So, and that's the primary sources, and plus coal, primary sources of CO2 emissions. So we have to do this, and they should coexist.
Yeah, so I was recently fortunate enough to be in Australia, and I liked the way that the public were discussing the transition and this versus thing. As you may have noticed with the oil and water speech, I'm not into the versus thing. I think it's a collaboration that's needed in an energy industry to meet mutual goals, and the fact that the one throws rocks at the others is getting us nowhere. We're going to need both. And the way the Australians describe it is you can't throw the old system out before you've built the new system. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because you can't just stop oil, I'm afraid. I mean, you could, but it would be catastrophic. And I think the people that want it stopped would not like the world that they lived in if it was actually ever stopped, which of course it never will be. It needs to transition. That transition is, as Nigel so eloquently described, is a 40 to 50 year thing. So politicians talking about doing it next week is not helping either. We need to recognise it's a big challenge. It's going to require you guys, the investor group. If it doesn't get the investment, it won't happen. And it won't happen unless we start coming together to realise that we can transition at a certain rate and we should optimise that rate. And the way we do that is to realise that we cannot throw the old system out before we've built the new system. And the new system will take time to displace the old one. And that's just the world we've got. On a sort of related sort of humankind, I do get a bit irritated. I mean, as an old national power employee, coal was close to my heart, and I ran a utility in central Kazakhstan, which was all run on coal. Coal's great. You've got to love coal. And, it's cheap as chips. And we in the UK, in the 70s, we would celebrate opening a coal-fired power station every year. Right? You just walk into government and go, we need another coal-fired power station. You get another coal-fired power station. So to say to China and India, you can't have your coal-fired power stations, is a bit rich, to be honest, because they need the power for hospitals and electric vehicles and stuff. So it is incredibly complicated to kind of create a worldwide energy regulatory framework that allows growth in countries that need growth. And they should grow, I think, at a economic price point that allows them to do that. So if you put huge burdens on them, because we in the West have had our coal, we've had our cake and eaten it, that's troublesome. So no wonder the COP conferences are long into the night, because it's not an easy problem to solve. But I think if we start talking about the old system, maybe the old system, the fossil system, the oil system, is going to be needed. We need to love it again, as it helps us to bring the new system in. And hopefully that will get, we probably also need a bank of energy, to be honest with you. And I know you're a political beast a little bit like me. So I think with a general election coming up, I'm jumping to the end, sorry about that, Stephen. That's my innovative nature. That we probably could do with a bank of energy. So just the politicians putting their hands up and saying they actually don't know the difference between a megawatt and a megawatt hour if it hit them over the head. So it'd be much better if they just said, look, let's have an entity, a state entity that is responsible for our transition pathway, and it's supported by all sides, and you can't have a general election or the 95th Prime Minister that comes up and says, well, actually what we'll do is decarbonise by Thursday week, because it's me. These guys are not going to get up and go, oh, good, I'll write a couple of £1 billion worth of check on that then. Well, no. You'll need a contract, I think you'll find, and that's difficult and takes time, takes 40 years.
Can I add quickly some statistics to the perspective? So David mentioned India and China. So just to put it in perspective, 7 biggest CO2 emitters in the world, these are China, the US, India, Russia, Japan, Indonesia, and Iran. These are 2/3 of the global CO2 emissions. So you exclude the US and Japan, that's going to be half of the CO2 emissions of the world, and that's where the most of the growth is happening. So that's is still fossil fuel driven. So.
And if I just come back to the point I made at the beginning, the energy transition is intrinsically slower than many other sectors because of the nature of the embedded capital, huge capital investments, power plants 40-year life, pipelines, grids longer, and it's harder, investors want to get return on those assets. So what happens during this phase of transition is that a lot of these assets are repurposed and rescoped, because the key is the word transition. It's not a complete revolution or transformation. And perhaps an interesting example would be picking up the green hydrogen. So we have an extensive gas network here in the UK, which is very used to providing us all power stations, industry, and domestic boilers with natural gas. That will inevitably be transformed over to producing and distributing a much cleaner supply of gas, which probably will be green hydrogen. But up at 5% blend, at 20% blend, the existing infrastructure is capable of delivering that green hydrogen to the users with very few capital changes, amendments, probably some work around the valves and the seals, because hydrogen molecules are smaller. But at 100%, so a complete replacement of natural gas by hydrogen, then we are looking at a completely new infrastructure build. But that 100% hydrogen delivery is probably not for another 20, 30 years.
And would you say that there are some good examples of success of collaboration between renewables and carbon-emitting technologies? And from an investor perspective, would you suggest that investors should create a cross-sector portfolios? And then lastly, do investors sufficiently take on board climate risk in their investment decisions? You go first, because you went last. I think.
Okay, thanks so much. Well, where are we in the energy transition? I say we're very early stages, and there is a significant set of targets. Let's call it net zero, 2050 targets, with a lot of countries having their own sub-targets within that. This is a long-term play. I'm not saying this is not a short-term flip. So any investment decisions taken today are going to be classically in that long-term perspective with returns generated over time. And during this period, there will be a lot of investment surges into new technologies, as I pointed out. And of course, some of those will exit at great multiples. But we are talking about energy, which is historically a long-term play. And I don't think that changes, even though we're transitioning away from carbon heavy to carbon light. I still think one takes a long-term perspective on this.
I have a cynical example about like new technologies that are considered green, and well, the older technologies, fossil fuel technologies, is basically carbon capturing and storage technologies that are used to a big extent to basically collect the emissions that are generated at oil fields, and that CO2 is pumped in wells to produce more oil and gas, which is again fine. But what is not fine, in my view, when taxpayers' subsidies are used to basically finance such projects. And I read a research about a year or 2 years ago. In the US, about 60% of the various government subsidies in the past that went to CCUS technologies went ultimately to pump more oil. through this ways.
Which is somewhat shocking.
Well, the world
not
is not a
surprising.
fair place.
Yeah.
Shall I chip in?
Sure.
So once you've got the investment running, and in Nigel's time frame, I could imagine a world where it's probably the oil and gas majors and their partners, their operating construction companies that will actually get this thing done, because they're extremely good at doing big projects fast, and that's what they've done for years. So we need to mobilize their capability to do this. And so far that's been quite close to a disaster. I mean, if you take tidal energy as my classic example, what I saw as an investor working for a fund manager that was looking at these companies is you get people, technologists, they often paint these things yellow and they float and they kind of bob about. And then the oil and gas guys goes, oh, no, well, we know what we're doing with that because we've been bobbing about in the North Sea for ages. And they went and invested vast sums of capital in getting vast amounts of kit washed up on beaches and investors just on their knees. It's been awful. So if we're going to deploy the common ground between renewables and the oil and gas world, we've got to do it smarter than that. And plug for Stephen's company, I think that's exactly what's going on at Reenergize, is taking a bit of oil and gas kind of technology and reimagining it for a world where you need energy storage. So yeah, I think I'd say to my old colleagues in the oil and gas world, please don't muck it up. You're quite important. You need to make better decisions. They've got involved in supply companies. That's been a disaster. So we need to get the oil and gas guys, the old guys, into the new world, but they need to do a better job of that. And I think that the new energy world, the renewable world, needs to be a bit more respectful of what the shoulders they're standing on, and say, look, we wouldn't be here at all if it wasn't for the old guys. So just get rid of that versus thing and just get on with the job and get the finance in place and get the big energy companies that can do big things quickly mobilized in the right direction.
Actually, we observed because we have been working with oil and gas and helping the oil and gas to become cleaner, but with most of the VC funds that focus on climate tech, decarbonization, whatever, we have been difficulties because they stigmatize the oil and gas industries, either because they are Article 9 compliant, or they're afraid of investing in technologies that would help oil and gas companies to become better. And ultimately, it is not doing any good for the climate action ultimately. If you basically turn your back on, it's like blaming a cow to produce meat and methane, right? It's not the cow, it's us who consume that. Same with oil and gas. And you need to be really engaged with them, because we cannot cancel them, right? That cancel culture. But we need to help them, and it's not easy for yourself to change yourself without some external help. And if investors and the public, cancel them, it doesn't serve the purpose ultimately.
Yeah.
So there is obviously a large and ongoing debate in oil and gas and renewables regarding the mitigation of carbon-intensive industry versus, let's say, the additionality of new renewable energies, and which of those ultimately is where most return will be. Ultimately, they will need to sit together. There will need to be a mitigation strategy, a mitigation implementation alongside additionality. But in terms of energy transition, the other side of the equation, which rarely gets discussed, actually, I just want to take 5 seconds on this, is energy efficiency. And there is clear evidence that more bang for your buck as an investor comes from energy efficiency than either mitigation or additionality of new renewable energy. But it's just not sexy. And it's very, very micro and small scale investment. But if more emphasis were placed on energy efficiency and globally creating a global energy system which was more virtuous, then I think a lot of the capital that is deployed and wasted would not happen. We would have a much more efficient and effective deployment of capital in the energy transition space.
Thanks very much. So we're sort of beginning to run out of time, and I would like to have a few questions. So what I'd quite like to do is allow you all to sort of do a little summary, plug your businesses should you wish to do so. But also as part of that summary, if you might just touch on sort of key socio-economic impacts. I think that's an important measure that we haven't really discussed at all. And so as part of your summing up, if you'd like to touch on that, that would be great. But try and keep to about a minute or just over each, and then we'll have a couple of questions.
Okay. If I may start. Yeah. So on the social justice and energy transition, this is a golden opportunity as well to create a global energy system which is fit for purpose. We currently have, this is factual, 1.4 billion people globally without electricity today. Even in countries that say we are sort of 99% electrified, that is not as a percentage of the population, that is connection points. And that electricity that is supplied is unreliable. It's probably from a dirty fuel source. It's largely unaffordable in many parts of the world. And this is a one-time opportunity, in my opinion, for us to create a system where we alleviate energy poverty on a global basis. We have more of a just energy system. The polluter pays is a great principle, but I don't think it's really affected. Carbon taxes need to be so much higher across all industries. And ultimately, we need a sense of equality and equity. So if we are depleting resources today, we are not making those resources available for future generations who are actually not here to have a vote. So we need to bear in mind energy justice, energy poverty, and equity as part of this energy transition equation.
Thanks, Nigel. David?
Okay. It was a big agenda. I knew we'd run out of time, so I think I've said enough. I'd like to hear from the room. So.
Val, anything you'd like?
One takeaway I would like to give to the audience, based on our experience, is that, decarbonization of the existing industry is a big opportunity. It's not yet there. Probably it will take another, at scale, it will take another 2 or 3 major climate-driven accidents before the public, the regulators will ultimately be really pushing hard. I don't think that it has been, they have been pushing hard on the decarbonization. But ultimately, I think the winning technologies and the winning startups will be those who will figure out how, besides having an cool breakthrough underpinning technology to reduce emissions, improve energy efficiency, etc., but also have mechanisms, user-friendly interfaces to embed those technologies and solutions into otherwise very slow-moving, complacent, risk-averse organizations of that old economy. It's not just oil and gas, but also cement and many other industries.
Thanks, Val. Some questions?
Thank you very much. So first of all, thanks for the discussion. Extremely interesting all the way around. My question is an incredibly basic one, which is, how realistic is it really that we're going to actually have an energy transition? And the reason I ask that question is there are 3 key points which you sort of touched on. I don't know what the solution is. I'm interested in your thoughts. The first is the Jevons paradox. The more efficient you make a process, the more of that thing you're going to use, just in outright terms. Energy efficiency means we're actually going to use a lot more energy as a result. The second thing is the energy density problem in the possibilities of renewable energy seems worrying given the Jevons problem like you mentioned. And then the third and final one that is also really concerning is the work by, I think his name is Professor Michaud, the Finland Geological Survey. And he's done, as far as I know, the most meticulous study of what mineral resources we would actually need to create the materials to make this transition happen in terms of new windmills, new solar, new pipelines, new whatever.
Thanks. I'm going to
the resources we have. So quickly respond, anyone?
So I think on the first point, you're talking about the rebound effect, where actually consumption increases because some form of technology is embedded in the system and it becomes more efficient, so people go to it. This may be the case, with white goods, domestic goods becoming more efficient, people can afford them, and hence the energy consumption goes up. But I think that's what you're referring to, is the rebound, sort of the rebound effect. I think the only thing I would say there is one has to look at the net. So look at the energy savings that might have been and the carbon emissions that might have been had this new technology not been in place. So it's the net position after that rebound effect.
David.
LED lighting is fantastic. So a lot of energy efficiency is stealth. A lot of people on the planet in the UK don't realise their lighting in their streets is changing, without them knowing. So it doesn't. The Jevons effect doesn't work there. So I think there is good energy efficiency, and there's bad energy efficiency, which is let's look at the Mini. Take a look at the Mini when it was built in 1960, whatever it was, and take a look at the modern Mini, and just ask yourself, what is the function of that thing? Well, it's to do pretty much the same job. So why is it 3 times as big? Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think energy efficiency, if it was applied to the automotive industry, we'd start reducing the size of our cars pretty quickly.
Well, quicker.
And if it's more or less cleaner and cleaner energy efficiency with Jevons thing, it's fine, I think. And I'm still believe that after a couple of wake-up calls, the world will institute some really harsh means, like, for example, I don't know, carbon emissions for $200, $300 per ton. So it will force the industries to really become cleaner, and the energy transition will go to the next phase.
Thank you very much. I think we're out of time. Any questions? No. So sorry, no further questions.
Sorry, you've got to be tough on time.
Yeah.
Off on time.
If you would like to thank the panel in the normal way. Thank you.